Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you're listening. Now, what does Jack Whitehall, comedian, actor and TV presenter, have to do with early careers marketing? Now, bear with me, because in this episode, I will find out with Rob Fryer. Rob is Director of Student Life at University of Leicester. Rob has extensive experience in the early careers market from his time as Head of Student Recruitment at Deloitte and board member of the Institute of Student Employers. So what Rob has to say about the student and early career market is certainly worth listening to. We chat about students and how they've been adapting to life in lockdown, what the Milkround will look like this autumn, and what recruiters can do to help students prepare for the world of work. Let's get on with the chat. Good morning, Rob. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, mate. How are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Thanks very much for joining. It's good to have you on an episode.
My pleasure.
Let's start off with, are you still locked down? We can still do a little bit of lockdown talk.
I suppose we are. We're in lockdown, aren't we? Yeah. It's become the new norm. I don't know any different at the moment.
Yeah, true. Yeah. You based in London, yeah?
Yeah, just on the outskirts. So we still probably haven't moved from about 2 mile radius from the house. Girls are back at school, my youngest is back at school, so we did a school drop off.
Oh, that's good.
But yeah, I haven't been back onto campus at Leicester since the 16th of March. So I haven't been back in a physical working environment for the best part of 3 months now.
Goodness. Well, hopefully things will be changing soon. But let's start off with, let's just kind of do a bit of intro. Tell us a bit about yourself and what your role is at the University of Leicester.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I can't help but do this. It makes me feel old when I start to think back on my career to date. But believe it or not, 20 years ago was when I graduated. It's coming up to that anniversary.
Same, yeah, me too. I can't believe it. Wow.
There we go. Don't look a day over 40.
Yeah, that's the spirit. Yeah.
So I started out in the early careers field. It's been called a whole host of different things over the years, isn't it? Graduate recruitment, student recruitment, early talent, etc. But I spent the majority of my time working in engineering organisations, banking, and most recently professional services. And I've worked very much across Europe, across the UK, marketing, campus recruitment, selection, a lot of learning and development, onboarding, etc. And then around about 4 years ago, poacher turned gamekeeper. I moved into higher education. Bit of a left field move, but started to work up at the University of Leicester as Director of Careers and Employability. And then my remit started to expand much broader than careers, more into sort of student services. A lot of the work we do supporting the student experience, their well-being, that students with disabilities that need some special support that we can provide. I also have sport and active life under my remit, which is quite nice. I wouldn't have thought I'd be starting to worry about how we're going to reheat the pool at this point.
Oh, wow,
maybe
really?
3 or 4 years ago. Yes, it's all good fun. Very different world, but a really interesting and fascinating world.
So is what part of the university is it connected to? Is it connected with the kind of careers and employability part of the organisation?
Yeah, so broadly speaking, I suppose I'd term it student services. So when I joined, I think it's fair to say that actually lots of universities have gone through this kind of evolution, but careers services had been quite traditional. You'd maybe go in there and have a CV checked. But as I think we're all increasingly aware, developing skills, building up a portfolio of experiences is as much to do with how you write a CV as it is to do with what you've got to write in it. So that kind of service portfolio expands broader than careers because students develop skills, they develop insights, acquire knowledge, test out their motivations, their experiences through sport. Through volunteering, through broader student experience activities than they would just get in the academic area. So that's how my kind of role has started to develop. And of course, if there's a big focus on mental health at the moment, students' broader well-being, and if students aren't in the right place to study and fulfil their potential at university, then they're not going to necessarily be in the right place to find the right job after graduation. So, it's a fascinating time to think in much broader times, and Leicester's very forward-thinking in that respect.
That's good. It seems like it's come a long way in the last decade. I mean, I used to be heavily involved in working with career services, and I remember popping to University of Leicester Career Service a few times, meeting the team there, but that was a while ago. But it certainly feels like, from what you're saying, certainly at your university, that it's going, actually, let's look at holistically what the student experience is, and I suppose one thing which is, is someone getting the most out of their time at university and enjoying themselves, but also, is that preparing them for the world of work, which is fantastic. It shows that it's just so much more than just living away from home or doing an academic subject that you may or may not be interested in.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we look back at a lot of the research. I mean, the majority of graduate recruiters, and certainly in the roles that I had, the majority of the recruits, it didn't matter what they studied. So in many ways, it's the byproduct of the skills that you acquire by studying than actually the academic content. Now, that's not true of doctors, right? That kind of content needs to be spot on. But the way I look at kind of my area within the institution, and the way I kind of describe it to colleagues from the graduate recruitment world that I kind of left, is that it's a learning and development program. It's a 3-year program. I don't get involved in the academic content the same way as I wouldn't necessarily at a professional services firm be teaching someone how to do tax computations. But it's the broader skills. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, it could come in handy now. But
that's true. Yeah.
So it's that kind of broader sort of skill set. So we've developed a matrix that we've kind of mesh our curriculum against around transferable skills. And my role is to support those within the curriculum to how they can best use their teaching practices to develop those skills. But most of the focus is in the co and extracurricular. So people, for example, that are active in sport, develop some wonderful skills that they could apply to a whole host of different careers in different contexts. So it's a really interesting role, and it's a really interesting time to be working in higher education.
Oh yeah, for sure. My goodness me. Actually, so you talked about sport, for example. Can we go into a little bit more about that in terms of kind of getting a feel for the kind of programs you've been working on to give students and therefore graduates more of a kind of a rounded experience and CV, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the research, sort of Sport England, British University Championship sports, have looked at students' skill set and have looked at their broader well-being. And a lot of the research comes back to suggest that if you're involved and engaged in physical activity, you're feeling better about yourself, you're enjoying during your life, you're able to fulfill your potential a little bit more. So there's a base level there that I think, whether you're a student or not, everyone I think can engage with to a degree. But there's something much more than that. So if you start to engage with their clubs or our societies and take more of an active role in maybe chairing meetings or looking after the finance of a club or running a club, if you look to develop your skills in a certain sport and then go into local schools and teach other people how to play hockey, how to get involved in rugby, for example, all of these different activities, students probably aren't getting involved with them because they want to develop a skill. They're getting involved with them because they have a passion, they have an enthusiasm, they want to have fun, they want to meet people. And my area very much takes that and say, well, that's great, do it. Let's put these activities on. It's about having fun. It's about enriching your experience. But at the end of it, let's take a little bit of time to reflect, because that school that you went into and you taught someone how to play hockey, what skills did you learn from that? How did that make you feel? Did you value that? And then let's reflect and start to think forward about, well, how are you going to take those experiences and what you've learned and put them into a career?
Yeah, that's awesome. Nice.
See, yes, it's a different way, I think, of trying to support students and understanding the value of an education.
Mm.
Um, and it is the broader education. It's we've got some wonderful academics with some brilliant content in some of the courses that we've got up at Leicester. But if I look back at my time at university, I can't think in any of my roles as a graduate recruiter or working in an institution like Leicester, where it's been useful for me to pull on anything to do with the Second World War that I learned in my second year at university.
Mm.
But actually, the discipline of maybe having a couple of hours lectures a week and having to manage my own time, having to work in different groups, different people from different backgrounds, I don't think I was aware of all those skills that I was building up when I graduated.
It's true. Sounds like work, doesn't it? It's what you just described.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
I just want to, I'm really sort of passionate about trying to put that in the forefront of our students' mind that this isn't about careers necessarily. This isn't about broader employability in the first instance. This is about
Mm.
supporting you to get the most out of your time at university.
Mm.
But let's not lose that opportunity to reflect and think about the skills that you've built and think about the way that you've managed your time at Leicester and how you can apply that in the world afterwards, because that's really what our students are coming to university for. I mean, great to have the experience and have fun, but they want something tangible at the end of it, like a
Mm.
job or postgraduate study or something better than they would have otherwise been able to achieve if they didn't go to university.
Ultimately, it's about having happy customers, isn't it? And that they're getting the investment that they're putting into their education. It's fantastic that you have this role, and you and the team are focusing on it. It's easy, it's easy to kind of think, oh well, someone else could do that, But if you have people trying to do too many things, then they will never do it justice, and don't have the experience, enough of the experience to make a good go of it. So as you said, yeah, things are looking a little bit different across all parts of life, and in particular, kind of university. So how have you guys found lockdown, and what's been going on?
It's been a really interesting time, Chris, and I think if someone said 4 months ago, we wouldn't be able to have students on campus, and everybody be working from home, I think my initial reaction would probably been a bit of a cold sweat and panic.
Mm.
But I think looking back over the last few months, I've been really impressed with how not only our students but also our academics and our services have adapted to this new world. It just shows how powerful that online content and online delivery can be.
Mm.
So if we maybe take a step back, right, 18 months, I remember having a conversation with our student union, and they quite rightly were challenging the university and saying things like, well, why do I have to get up on a Monday morning and walk into a lecture theatre to have an academic talk at us for 45 minutes and then I can kind of go again? This is
Mm.
an outdated mode of delivery. What I'd really like is some online content that
Brilliant.
I
Yeah.
can look at 24/7, pause, take notes, rerun, look at again, go through, digest, at a time of my choosing, when I'm up for it, when I'm ready for it. And this has really kind of given us, certainly universities, a bit of a push to really up that ante in that and deliver to students in a different way.
Mm.
Our careers appointments have gone up in terms of usership. We're having more people getting engaged with our one-to-one sessions and some of our webinars than we would do in person.
That's good.
Interestingly, our counselling services haven't been inundated as I maybe would have expected, but the quality of the conversations has been, certainly in terms of the feedback we've had from students, a little bit better, and they
Mm.
feel a little bit more comfortable speaking openly online than they would do maybe face to face with someone. So I think all in all, the last 4 months have been a challenge, but have really shown us that we've got some great assets that would allow us to deliver remotely, and there's some
Mm.
real benefits to it.
Yeah, nice. Oh, I mean, God, that's a whole other episode in terms of the model of the delivery of education, using online for that. It's a really interesting topic. And so from September, is the university kind of, how much of it is going to be staying online come the time when students usually return to campus?
God, I think I'm going to need to put a disclaimer here before we start.
You can't say. Yeah, fair enough.
I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone in 3 or 4 months. Do you know what? It's if I had a magic wand and I was to sort of wave it right away and everything was to go back to normal, the students that would be coming onto campus in September have been out of education for 6 months. They probably haven't left their house for the best part of 4 months of that. So their recent lived experiences would make the next academic year incredibly different, even if I did have that magic wand. But do you know what? I don't. So thinking about what potentially would be happening, and some of the things that we can think about is that there's going to be doubt over student numbers. Will students want to come back and complete their degree? Will they decide to go to university? Will we be able to recruit international students? Will they be comfortable coming to the UK? So will we be able to onboard everybody at the same time, given some of the challenges that we've got around social distancing, etc.? So it's going to be very different. There are a few things we do know, right? So I think we can probably say with some certainty that there will be social distancing. So I think campus will look slightly more like some of the shops that people are flocking back to, or the school classrooms that schools have had to sort of set up. It may well look very similar in a university setting. There's a lot of talk around bubbles. So again, I know schools have adopted this approach, and it's worked really nicely with my daughter going back to school. It's been pretty much a seamless transition for her going back. So I can well imagine we'd have sort of bubbles of 15 or so students maybe living and studying together. The blended learning piece that we've touched on, I think, will be prevalent, but I do think there'll be some in person, probably in smaller groups, which I think will be advantageous, and I think really important to ensure the quality of provision from an education perspective, but also in terms of delivering that broader student experience. But from an employer's perspective and a graduate recruiter's perspective, I think this is going to be fascinating, right? Because careers fairs, open presentations, brochures, stands, freebies. Thinking of the conversation we would have been having probably 8 years ago, we wouldn't necessarily be worried about the brochure anymore, Chris, would we?
No. At last. Yeah. Disclaimer there. Me and Rob used to work together when I was at Havas, and Rob was at Deloitte. So really enjoyed working with you there. And I think it's Can you see much of on campus, or the Milkround, as it's always been classified, really happening in any shape or form in October?
I don't think we will. Well, the challenge that I think we have, and the wonderful thing about the Milkround in many ways, that we'll probably come on to some of the less positive things around the traditional Milkround, but the one thing that it did give both recruiters and students was a very physical, tangible mark in the sand. This is where this is now. Careers are here. Start thinking about it. There's a physical presence. There's a big collection of activities around about that time of year that nicely fits into students' academic calendar before they start thinking about exams, after they've kind of become acquainted with the institution. And there's a lot of passing trade. And I know recruiters that I'm talking to at the moment are worried about not having that physical presence, so they don't get that kind of career browsers, for example. Maybe students that know where they want to apply will be able to go directly to them, but the passers by they won't be able to get because they haven't got that physical presence. So I think it will be different, and I think we'll try in many ways to replicate that call to action and try to engage students with careers online. Okay. And it may well be come January that it will be delayed, that we can bring activities back onto campus, that we can start to invite more and more employers back in from January onwards, for example. So it might be delivered a little bit later. What I'm hoping is that some of the learning that we touched on about the last sort of 4 months in lockdown, and potentially as we could see it coming through from autumn, we can harness that and start to crystallize some of the great activities that have gone on, and then maybe start to challenge some of the more traditional approaches, which I know from my time as a recruiter that it's hard to justify, in terms of when budgets are maybe reduced and you've got maybe a reduction in graduate vacancies. It's hard to justify such a large spend on a physical presence. So I'm thinking some of the new ways of working and innovations that we've seen and that are to come, I'm hoping will stay in the market for years.
I think actually what you say about Milkround is spot on. It's a bit like it's the time of the year where it's a bit of a festival of careers, isn't it? It's a time where both students and recruiters know that they have a chance to get together over a few weeks, and very much focus on talking about careers. So yeah, and I think actually that kind of blended in the same way with blended learning. I think it would be great to see a kind of a Milkround, a graduate recruitment world where you do have that mixture of online discussions and then face to face. It's a bit like really interesting what you said about what your students are saying, about well, why do I have to come in for a lecture when I can get access to that content online, and leave the more higher touch, socially distancing higher touch contact face to face in person to more kind of higher value conversations where, say, in January, maybe when people can get back onto campus more readily, there are then conversations had off the back of some discussions that were had online. I think that'd be a really interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the face-to-face contact will probably be back-ended in the processes. So if we think about maybe careers fairs, you could, and let's get rid of the term careers fairs. They're large-scale mass participation events, right?
Yes, nice.
So you can kind of replicate that online.
Yeah.
And you can record it, and you can have that ripple effect. People can engage with the content over and over again, which you don't get with the one-off kind of physical event. So you can replicate the question and answer sessions. You can ensure, through your sort of social channels, that you can keep some of that content there so people can see the questions that other people have asked and learn from that. So I think you can replicate that. To which degree of success is to be determined, but I think you can replicate that. So if we carry on with this kind of bubble idea that you've got students in your selection process and those that are coming towards the end of it, the higher value candidates, potentially you could engage with them on campus or in your own employer's offices a little bit later on. And that should be a nice balance, I'd like to think, to ensure that, I mean, it frightens me actually that a student could go into an employer without physically setting foot in their office or meeting someone in person. I think that face-to-face is so important. And, if we think about, or purely thinking about my careers, I would say I've probably left bosses or leadership teams as opposed to companies. And I've probably gone into roles because of the people that are in the teams that I'm joining, or the leadership of those teams, and buying into that vision. I think the brand and the title of those organisations is important, but it's much more important, certainly from a personal perspective, the people I could be working with and their vision. And I don't think that's too different for students. They want to get a feel for the people they're going to work with. It's such an important point in a student's life moving into graduate employment. So that they're going to want to feel and understand that culture and experience it themselves. So I'm hoping that later on in the processes that recruiters will start to adopt practices that you've just described.
Yeah, nice. So I've mentioned a lot, and marketers do mention a lot about kind of this thing about providing value to the audience, and this is a big part of content marketing, which is, you start off with not thinking about, well, what can we sell? You're thinking, how can I provide value to the audience? But I always like to kind of put the meat on the bones of that word value, So when it comes to students, what is it they really do value? We touched on it, some of it already, but I'd like to kind of talk about it a bit more. What is it that students really do value from graduate recruiters?
I think for me, and the way, certainly when I was a recruiter, the way I'd try to approach these things is the quid pro quo. So if a student comes to your event or if a student engages with you, they've given up their time and they want to have equal value from that interaction as you have. So as a recruiter, you maybe want to find the best candidates, you maybe want to engage them with certain selection processes, etc., etc. So that's great. So, but what do I get away from that? What do I take away from that as a student? What's the point of me coming along? I can see why you want to do it. I can see how you've got vacancies to fill. I can see how you've got a campaign that you want to run, and you maybe be judged by leadership on quantitative numbers that come through, and etc. etc. But from me as a student, what do I get? So I think it's important that recruiters look at that from both sides, that there is equal skin in the game from any kind of interaction. But broadly, from a student's perspective, they want something tangible. And I think the interesting thing in this market at the moment, and this is a broad term, just purely from interactions that I've had with our students at Leicester, but I think they're anxious and they're worried about next steps. And they're hearing a lot of negative messages. Unemployment is up, redundancies being made across the board, small businesses are struggling to make ends meet. So I think to a certain degree, my answer is the same as pre-pandemic, but I think it's more emphasis on it. It's just a lot more important now that students want to have insight into, well, what is the market you're operating in looking like? How is it going to change given COVID? What advice have you got as a recruiter? How can I be successful? How can I improve my chances of getting a role with you? How can I develop my employability? Is there something fun that I can get involved with while I'm doing it? Something engaging, meet people, learn something? So I think it's a really, really great opportunity for graduate recruiters to move away from some of those messages and high-level messages around what they're doing and how they're doing it, to start to actually demonstrate it with something tangible that can engage with those students. So we were speaking before, Chris, and that idea that you've been talking about around sort of broadcast and thinking of yourself as a broadcaster. I think this really plays in wonderfully into this market.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's the thing about uncertainty is, I think, really, I think important. It's I'm actually doing a proposal at the moment, actually, for a client, and is it 33% of graduates are only 33% of graduates are confident in securing a role after university because of coronavirus, and 80% of graduates are worried that COVID-19 will affect their university grades. So there's this thing about needing that help, and glad you picked up the broadcasting, because if you kind of think of it as if I'm producing a program, what is it that people are going to find entertaining, but also valuable, helpful? And I think goodness me, graduate recruiters are in such a good position, through the amount of candidates they see, the amount of applications they screen, the amount of stories they have in an organization, is they have a massive wealth of content to provide people to make them less uncertain, to make them more confident in what they do, and that's content marketing ultimately.
Yeah, and we can't have a conversation without mentioning Jack Whitehall, can we? But this is a
let's talk about that. I love that. Yeah.
This is a really good example, right, of when not walking the walk has come back to bite me in particular. So we did previous employer I worked for was a big thing around student experience, providing feedback, that quid pro quo value. And we didn't necessarily deliver on that with a certain Mr. Whitehall who'd applied for a vacation scheme. So fast forward in 5 years, I think we were sitting together at it must have been the Rads, where
it was. I think so.
Where I still can't watch him on TV. It's lived with me to this day. But there he was on stage, and we were really excited about getting nominated for an award, and we thought we did some really cracking work, and we were in with a shout. So got to our turn. Mr. Whitehall took the stage, started to read through the nominees, and then opened that wonderful gold envelope and announced that initially that we'd won. Now, at that point, I think we jumped up. I was pretty much on the stage already. I was getting very, very excited. And
feeling all very, very full of ourselves.
Exactly. Yeah. And then he very kind of in a very understated way turned around and said, "Oh no, my mistake. They this organisation rejected me 5 years ago, and the winner actually is." And it just so happened to be our biggest competitor at the time.
Yeah, and didn't he go, "So that's what it feels like, Deloitte"?
At that point, I was on my knees. I was crawling back to the table, to be honest. But I mean, in all seriousness, I think we'd been very keen to make a point around the student experience, about ensuring that students got to some good feedback, that even those that were rejected, and it was a big thing at the time, wasn't there? And I think a lot of people, myself included, were starting to think about graduate recruiters more in the terms of graduate rejectors. So we'd get 30,000 applications, but we'd only hire 2,000. So the majority of students we had contact with, it was a negative experience. So we were really keen to try to do a little bit more to improve the experience for those students and add value to the experience for those students, that if they weren't to get a role, then at least they get some learning from it and are able to translate that maybe into other applications. Now, we clearly failed with Mr. Whitehall on that occasion. But if we start to think about the way that students are feeling at the moment, they're feeling vulnerable, they're a little bit worried, they're maybe a little bit cynical, they don't really know what's going on. This is a real opportunity, I think, for recruiters to follow through on that promise. And wouldn't it have been great if we'd have potentially given Mr. Whitehall a slightly more positive experience, that he maybe wouldn't have brought that joke to the fore, but we'll never know.
We'll never know. Yeah, exactly. No, it's a good story to share. I'm glad you shared it. So see, there's, because of what's been going on over the last few months, that thing about installing confidence in people who are about to join the world of work is important. Is there anything else you think is kind of value that graduate recruiters can give students who are not too far away from entering the world of work?
Well, I think we were talking earlier, weren't we, about that marketing meeting. If we were sitting down and thinking about the start of next academic year, what's that marketing going to look like and how that's going to come in place? Well, I think the first bit is to really start to understand the market and how students are feeling. The context, I think, is all important. So I can imagine that we've now got a group of students that fall into maybe several buckets. So you're maybe going to get your career hungry students that are looking at the current situation and thinking, I'm going to need to double down on this. I'm really going to make an effort to get that job. You then got others that are like, right, well, there's no jobs out there. I'm just going to put this off. I'm not going to get involved in this. This is just way too difficult. Then there's maybe another group that are thinking, I might take a step back from the market. I might go into postgraduate study. I think a lot of the last sort of 20 odd years have sort of shown me is that when graduate vacancies tend to go down, postgraduate applications go up.
Yeah, now, understandably.
Well, I mean, it'd be interesting whether that actually follows next year, because obviously the mode of study is slightly different, and the education offer could be off-putting to some. I hope it won't be, and I'm relatively confident that the universities can rise to the challenge of providing good postgraduate courses. But that's a little bit of an anomaly in there. But if we just look about those groups, students are going to want to have those that are slightly more cynical about the market. I think it's important for recruiters to start to build trust. I think that the value proposition, the narrative, I think there's a place there for openness, for honesty. There's a lot going on in the world at the moment. We talk about COVID, but there's a big agenda around environmental sustainability. over the last few weeks and months, there's been a lot of protests up in London, Black Lives Matter. So that value proposition, I think, is really important for organisations to review and have a look at, and ensure that it is current within the context in which they're recruiting.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I think that's probably where I'd start with the context, and then thinking about that narrative. How do we build trust with our audience? How do we ensure that potentially, if there's any damage to our reputation because of COVID or any negative headlines, how can we start to provide a little bit more clarity to the challenges that we have, and how we're going to meet them in the face of that student audience that are either cynical or just moving away from the market entirely, or actually are really keen and just want to suck up some more content.
Yeah, I think it's that thing of going, well, what do we talk about if we can't talk about vacancies? Now, not to say that in times of recruitment freezes, although I can't see that happening for many graduate recruiters, obviously, but I think that mindset of what do we talk about if we haven't got we can't really push our vacancies. That is content marketing ultimately, and I think that having that kind of mindset, I think, is really important, and it all does definitely start with thinking about the audience. And there is a long game in it, really. I know there are targets to be hit, but ultimately when you're looking at students who are starting out at university, first year, second year, final year, post-grad, then the world of work, first step in your career, next step. That's a long journey that you have from education to throughout your career. And actually, it would be nice to have some organizations there to be kind of there, close to hand, because you might end up joining them, go back to them. So if you can provide value and build that trust right at the very beginning, it's probably a good starting point, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if we, so look, I'm working on the assumption that a lot of recruiters' budgets may have been slashed or potentially repurposed, or there's a bit of confusion about what's kind of happening around targets, etc. But I think if we were to sit in that meeting, we'd probably do a little bit of a SWOT analysis. We'd start to look at the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, the threats to that market. We'd look at our current content. We'd look at how that could be repurposed, topped and tailed, and we'd look at those channels where we could engage some of our passive career hunters, and social media, I think, would probably be the main route for that. But the one thing that I think all employers have currently, maybe slightly less than a few months ago, but they have staff. They have recent joiners that have come out of graduate recruitment. Have come through graduate recruitment channels, etc. So the one thing that I think I'd probably be looking at the moment is looking at those new joiners, those recent graduates within my organisation, and start to think, well, actually, if I was a student, I'd want to engage with content from someone that I trust, or someone that's relatively familiar to me. So I'd look at my recent joiners, and I'd look for it through two lenses. One, to start to generate some of that content, to give some real understanding of what working life would look like through the eyes of someone that has recently joined the organisation, and not from a recruiter, not from the leaders of those organisations, but your first year joiners. What is it really like? Tell me a little bit about it. What's the culture like? How can, with some maybe video content, Q&A, something along those lines. And then I'd probably use those recent joiners for a bit of talent spotting as well. And I think, for my mind, if you're in an organisation, you're not going to recommend anyone for a role that you don't think is relatively good. You might go back to your old lecturers, you might go back to people that you know on campus, some of your friends, etc., and you could engage with them to spread the word, or to cascade some information, or share some content. But broadly speaking, that kind of talent spotting, you're not going to refer anyone, I don't think, to your organisation that you don't think has got a good shout of getting into that job. So I think people have got some real opportunities, I think, to reach out into that student community and build that trust, build that openness, and build that that kind of link to go through some of that, to negate some of that cynicism through using their own employees.
definitely. I think it's really kind of reassuring to to be speaking to someone who was in your place in a matter of months or a few years ago. I think it's that thing about kind of having the importance of kind of empathy, feeling like you understand the situation that someone is in now, and that's you. I think that's what builds rapport, isn't it? Really, I think that's absolutely spot on idea about doing that. Kind of using that has been used, hasn't it? I mean, typically it's been like go to a careers fair and go to a presentation, maybe be involved in an employee profile. But yeah, it does certainly sound like there's more that can be done in terms of using employees to go back to their networks and I suppose and kind of get involved in the kind of things that you're doing at university at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking back to our time working together at Deloitte. Some of the more successful campaigns that we ran on social, I suppose I'd put into a couple of categories. One was around the culture. We did a lot around Christmas time, showing just sort of talking heads or pictures of Christmas trees in different offices, which just started to break down that large corporate persona actually is something. Well, hey, we're wearing Christmas jumpers as well. And I know it sounds a bit corny and a little bit silly, kind of speaking about it after the event, but the students, it broke down a few barriers. It was a shared celebration. People were starting to think, there's a warm face and
Totally.
there's someone there I'd like to work with. And then taking that on a little bit further, some of the work produced at Deloitte, came out last week, and it's a particular passion of mine is is football, but the Deloitte Football Money League. I mean, what great content! You can engage an audience there with some stuff that's already carried out, some work that's already, but using that and topic and tailing that, it's a wonderful way to get people engaged on campus. And to translate some of the work, if we went out with a tagline, come and work in tax or audit or whatever, that might not get the same level of engagement, but actually physically demonstrating some of the work that's been done and engaging people with it from that side. And if you're able to take that and maybe some talking heads and some real life sort of, or even just on your smartphone, taking some very short video snippets of people that have recently joined the organisation out on client sites or in the middle of a meeting, or we did some with some of our recruiter friends from Teach First, just some snippets of people working in a classroom. It just
Nice.
helps students to think, oh, this is what it's like. Wow.
There's a great bit of software actually. I chatted with a company a few episodes ago, but it's Source.video. Which is a mobile video creation platform, and Priya and the team there are great, and it's a really nice piece of software, and that means it's easy to collate that kind of stuff. I think you're absolutely right about all that. I think with when it comes to video, it's often seen as being quite unattainable, but we create as human beings, a lot of us create video a lot. We're taking photos or we're using a mobile phone, so it makes sense to tap into that for sure.
I mean, how many times have we walked past someone in the street who's just glued to their phone looking at it? I'm sure lots of people around my way have walked past me when I'm glued to the phone watching some YouTube clips or some it's a nice way of breaking down some barriers. And if it's an alumni of the university that's come through, then I think it just helps with that engagement. And I think this is where I thinking about existing assets, not only I think of employers got their own staff that they could use to support them on campus, but universities have got up and down the country some wonderful career services. And I'm very fortunate. I've got a wonderful team at Leicester that can give employers and graduate recruiters a unique insight into the moods, the demographics, the degree content, the degree preparedness of the degree of preparedness of our students to go into employment. And this can really, I think, support a recruiter in channeling their efforts where they'd like to get the most return on investment. So, we could tell you across our careers registration that we carry out when students register with them each year, how many students that have got work experience, how many that feel that they're planning on, they're now taking a step forward and planning their career, how many of them that have got absolutely no idea what they want to do, how many of those that are actually in a position where they've got a CV ready and they'd like to talk to employers. And if we start to take those audiences and start to segment them by maybe degree types, by potentially the profile of the student, if we're looking at diversity targets, we can start to look at where those students want to work geographically across the UK and internationally. That unique insight that a careers service will be able to give that employer will be able to help ensure that the content that is generated by the recruiters is positioned at the right time, the right place, and most importantly, in front of that right target audience. So I think we've got the mechanics there across the market, from the employers, the wonderful work that they've carried out, I think, moving selection processes online, through to the content that they can start to produce with their current employees, or that they've maybe got on a wonderful website that they could start to draw out, and then working with career services that could give a real clear steer on the student mood and the student audience that they're looking to target. There's a real opportunity, I think, to work slightly more collaboratively than we have done in the past, to ensure that I want my students to get jobs. Recruiters want students to take their jobs. There's a great opportunity, I think, to make the market more efficient and more effective, and that can be done by picking up a phone or getting on a Zoom call, or whatever it is. So I think this is a real opportunity to build relationships, build networks, to start to collaborate, and just to try something a little bit new. In many ways, it's a bit of a free hit this year, isn't it? We're working in a very different way. We don't know. We've got nothing to tell us what's going to work, what isn't going to work. So let's try some things. Let's have a go. Let's fail quickly. Let's learn from it. Let's move on to the next thing.
Exactly. There, I think there's always got to be an element of, you got to feel. I suppose you've got to feel that this something is going to work, and have enough to give you confidence that something might work. But there's always going to be an element of, well, this might not work. I think giving yourself that freedom to know that, well, if it doesn't work, we'll know how to make it better next time, I think is a really nice way of looking at it, because otherwise you end up just doing the same thing. I think definitely, the kind of graduate recruitment season, the Milkround is a perfect example of how this is, what happens over the next few months is it's going to be really interesting, and could actually define how it's done, from now on. There will be, of course, the classic thing of, what is the new normal? There will be an element of going back to normal, but I reckon there's going to be a decent chunk of it that will change for sure.
And this is the beauty of online, and you'll be able to talk to this much more knowledgeably than I will. But if we think about online content, I think it's easier to get data on who's accessing it, on how people have engaged with it, versus a careers fair, which I don't think you can get the same kind of data analytics onto it. No. I don't think you can adjust it, a careers fair and your stand and your brochures. You can't adjust that in real time, whereas you can with your online content. So I think in many ways that there's an accessibility that online gives you that maybe you can't get at a careers fair or with a brochure. It just feels slightly more inclusive. We touched at the beginning around well-being, anxiety. I get the feeling that students are more likely to engage online than they would maybe feeling anxious coming up to someone and talking to them at a careers fair. Universities do some great work around supporting students with a disability, but again, working with online content, I think is slightly more accessible than it is going into a careers fair. So I think this enables you to innovate, and it enables you to fail quickly, because you've got the demonstrable analytics that you can put behind it to take a view as to whether it's working or not. And if it isn't, then you try it at a different time in a different way, slightly repurpose some of that content and have another go.
Exactly. And when you do, look at, how you can use online for events, I think you've then got something where, okay, if you have FAQs, you always make sure you have those FAQs up front. You don't just wait there in front of the camera hoping that people will ask questions. You come prepped with stuff, and even if you don't get many questions coming in live, you've got video content there to actually then distribute afterwards. I know when we were working together at Deloitte a good while ago now, maybe I think it was maybe 2015 perhaps, but Conor O'Shea was involved in a small event talking about leadership. And I remember there was a few people from Deloitte there, and also from Bucks, I think it was. It was like 25. It was in Surrey, I think it was, and that's where the Harlequins trained. So Conor O'Shea was like, I think just been talking to Danny Kerr, the kind of stuff, but he was, he came in and he was part of a talk about leadership to a group of 25 students, but we did it live, and those 25 students there in the room, but there was 250 students watching it live as it happened. And then when we had the video afterwards, it reached, not reached, we had like 2,500 people watch that video, of the session. So, talk about being able to scale something. It's and that content is still there, and that content was then available to cut up and use on social. So you kind of, classic phrase, sweating that asset or something, but not to say, not calling Conor O'Shea an asset, but it just shows how by doing something, adding an extra layer to something means that you can get so much more value. And I think there has been that challenge with the careers fairs. I mean, I've been involved in careers fairs a lot. I've been to lots of careers fairs at the beginning of my career. And there's that danger of when it's done, and what else can you get out of it? If you can make sure that, I suppose you're wagging the tail of that campaigning, as much as possible, then it's, I think you're going to get more value for money as well. And you can say, well, yeah, instead of a careers fair, we met these number of people. If you did something online, then that people have signed up, you can retarget them. Of course, that shouldn't mean you just retarget them with any old stuff like, now, do you want to apply for us? If you had a good conversation with someone at an event or online, then actually you want to build that trust as you were talking about and give them something of value. And we've talked about a number of things that would be of value to somebody. It's certainly interesting. I wouldn't be the first person to say we're living in interesting times, but I think it's really good to get your kind of viewpoint on it. And we've just to finish off, and this has been a lot about tips, but what would be your 2 or 3 takeaway / tips from what, say, graduate attraction team should be talking about when they perhaps next sit down and talk about what their plans are?
I think my agenda would probably have three key items on it. One would be a bit of an inventory. What have we got? We've got wonderfully well stocked websites. We've got content that's probably on a page that hasn't been looked at for a while. Let's do an inventory. Let's see what we've got, and let's see what assets that we have available to us in the terms of maybe brand ambassadors on campus, potentially our own employees, as I kind of touched on earlier. So I would really look at what assets have we currently got. I'd then start to think about how we could deploy them within the context of the current environment. I think that would be incredibly important. And then start to think about, well, how can we test some of these things out? And this is where the critical friend piece, I think, that career services can offer employers is to get a feel for the student audience. We're very fortunate. We've got a popular service amongst Leicester students. I think this week, just looking at some of the analytics that have come through, we've had just over 150 appointments with our students that have come into the service virtually, to talk to our advisors, to get hints and tips on CVs, or to get some kind of insight and guidance on where they can go with their careers. So this is a wonderful and unique in-time insight that the career services up and down the country can give. So I think the third thing is, once you've worked out what you've got, once you've started to look at how you could apply that more within the context of the pandemic, once you've come up with those ideas and you've started to build those plans, is engage with career services to to provide you with a little bit more insight and to help to formulate those plans to ensure that you get the best return on investment.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, my experience of working with career services, they're there to help. Basically, it's in their interest to make sure that that their students are as prepared as possible, and employers have what they need. So yeah, absolutely spot on. Well, thanks very much. Really enjoyed that chat. I think we're pretty much done on time now, but it's great to catch up, and really appreciate your time.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Robin. Have a good weekend when you get there.
Yeah, and you, mate. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to follow or subscribe for the latest episode drops. And don't forget to get in touch if you want to contribute.